Now we're starting Unit 3, which starts with Chapter 11, which is on cell communication. How the cells, even though they're only one, little unit, they do communicate with each other in many different ways. Okay, so cells can signal each other and then interpret those signals. So it's kind of cool considering how little they are that they can do that. It's mostly through chemicals, okay? But they can send out signals and they can receive signals, and when they get those signals, they can interpret them and do something about it. Okay, and again, like I said before, they're most often chemicals, hormones, or something they've sent out. But you're talking about one little tiny organism, and it can take in that information and do stuff with it. So it's like they have a brain, which is pretty cool. Okay, the same set of cells have signaling mechanisms. Okay, and it can be like in our bodies, we have nerve cells. Okay, nerve cells are really cool because they can send information all the way down them, and without them, we can't move, we can't think, we can't do anything. So they have a system set up to send information all the way down, and so there's some reaction at the end. And they have nerves that, like when you touch something and it's hot, there's on your fingertips, there's neurons that, collect that information and say, ooh, that's hot, and send it up to your brain. And then your brain sends something out, says, ooh, take your finger off there. And it happens really fast. And that's all cells and their mechanisms. And that's nerve cells. That we have other ones that send out hormones. We've got all kinds of different cells that can do that. That's pretty cool if you think about it, because they're just little tiny, tiny, tiny critters. Okay, here's an example of what happens when you've heard of the fight or flight response. This guy needs to fly or he's going to be dinner. And so his body's releasing epinephrine. You probably know it as adrenaline. And his cells, all kinds of things happen in his body with the cells to make that possible. Raising his heart rate, raising his blood pressure, raising even as the pupils dilate to bring in more light so they can see more. There's all kinds of things that happen with the fight or flight. And again, that's all cell signaling. Okay, this is epinephrine. And again, adrenaline. This is nitrogen. These are oxygen. These are hydrogen and carbon. That's all it is, but in a different formation. So most of your biomolecules are just made out of those three, or carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and then you can throw in nitrogen or sulfur, but carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, they're the main ones. Okay, so the cells can do in different ways. The external signals that come, they can convert them to responses by doing many different things. And the way they figured it out was by studying microorganisms, bacteria, one-celled organisms. People aren't real thrilled about, doing research on, animal cells and stuff because they're supposedly a living thing, and if you destroy them or whatever. So they do a lot of work with bacteria because when you're done with the bacteria, kill it, throw it away, and nobody cares. So, that there's certain things, whatever, but they all work the same. So even working with microorganisms, they can learn a lot, and they don't have to worry about, messing around when they're done. They can just destroy them. Okay, so we have two ways. Actually, there's three ways. We have local. So they're either touching each other and sending them signals, or they're really close to each other. Okay, so that would be local signaling. And so they're going to have to, whatever they send out is going to have to respond within a very short distance. Okay, and I'll show you how they do that. And then we have long distance, where your brain sends out something that has to work on your kidneys. And they are going to need to put stuff in the bloodstream, and the bloodstream is going to be the carrier for that. But they can do it both ways. Okay, so when they're talking about local, they have where they're direct contact, like neurons. Actually they're not. There's a space in between them, and they send chemicals across. But some cells are like intertwined, and so they can send, by touching each other, they can send out the information. They have direct contact. Okay, animal and plant cells, they have their cytoplasm is actually kind of directly connected. They have little junctions, and they're connected. So, one can send out to the guy right next to it, and it's not a problem because they're connected and the information goes. Okay, so they send signals in the cytosol, which is, the harder part of the cytoplasm, and it can freely pass in between them. Okay, that's one way. And there's two locals and one long distance. Okay. Sometimes they communicate, like if they're not touching each other, but they're still close. What they do is they communicate. They use messenger cells. They secrete messenger molecules, and then that carries the information. But it has to be close. Okay, like with a neuron, you have a junction in between the neurons, and then there's a chemical that carries that information right across the junction. Okay, so they have to be real close to each other for these to work. Growth factors would be one. You have a lot of those in your brain and their target is really close, so they send the factor out and it goes right to the whatever the target cell, and like your pituitary or whatever. Okay, so we have one class of local regulators in animals, and again, the local, we can either be directly touching each other or we can send out messenger and it'll send it, but they have to be close by. Okay, so, and they call that, when they're really close, when it's local, they call it paracrine signaling. Okay, paracrine. Okay, then the long distance, so, you know, something's made in your brain and has to go down to your kidney or your heart or whatever. They use things called hormones. And really, hormones are proteins. Okay, they can be modified enzymes, things like that. Okay, with hormone signaling, okay, now they call it endocrine. All right, so with local, it was paracrine. With long distance, if you want to call it that, it's endocrine. This means it's going to secrete something, and it secretes these special chemicals into the bloodstream called hormones. And then the hormones have special cells that they have target cells. Remember, we talked about enzymes, and enzymes have an activation site that they attach to, and they attach there, and then there's a little reaction occurs and it produces some products. It's kind of along the same lines. Okay, they have specialized cells that the hormones will travel to and get to. The bloodstream, the circulatory system will get them there. They'll attach to that site and then they'll do something. Like, for instance, you have on your kidneys, you have your adrenal glands. That's where the epinephrine comes from, adrenaline. Okay, so the brain says, oh, we're in trouble, we got to run fast. It's going to send the information down, and the hormone's going to hit that adrenaline gland and say, oh, we got to release a lot of this stuff. And then the adrenaline will start doing, being released and affecting all the other stuff. Okay, so the ability of a cell to respond depends on whether or not it has a receptor for it. Okay, so if there's not a receptor on the adrenal gland, so when the brain sends out, hey, we're in trouble, take care of this, it doesn't get it, and then you're, a turtle instead of, flying. So there's, they have to have a receptor site in order. So the hormones are traveling all through the blood, and they're not going to do anything until they get to one that has a spot for them. Okay, they're not going to affect any other organ. They're going to go to the place where they're supposed to be, and that's where they're going to do their work. Okay, here's showing you the paracrine signaling. Okay, you've got a cell here, and it's going to secrete little molecules, and they're going to hit their target cells. They're really close to each other. Okay, that's paracrine. Okay, so when we're talking about cell signaling, there was a guy by the name of Sutherland. He's kind of the one that figured out how hormones, and he worked with the epinephrine. Because that's a huge thing, the fight or flight. People pick up cars, when it falls on somebody. Obviously, that's not something you can normally do, but you get this, extra jolt. He's the one that figured out how those cells work. Okay, he suggested that the cells receive signals and they go through 3 processes. Okay, so whenever a cell is going to react because of the signaling, there's 3 things it goes through. First thing, it receives it. It actually takes it and does something with it, instead of just letting it bounce on by. Then it's going to have to go through some sort of it's going to take it in, and then it's going to go through what they call transduction. There's going to be some transformation, okay? They're going to have to do something because of this. And then because they did this, now there's going to be a response. So the information is taken in, and then it's transformed into whatever it needs to be doing, and then there's going to be some sort of response because of it. Okay, so the reception, there's a target cell and it detects the signal. It's like, a radio frequency. Radios pick up only certain frequencies. Okay, so the right frequency came in, the cell's going to accept that signal, and it's going to bond to some sort of protein. There's receptor proteins on the surface of the cell. It bonds to it. If you remember, we talked about cell membranes that had those proteins sticking up. Well, there's proteins that, respond to some sort of target that comes in, some sort of protein. Okay, so then what happens? Now we've got the signal, we got to do something. It binds to a molecule, okay, and it's going to do some sort of pathway. I mean, whatever it needs to do, if it needs to change something, if it needs to start using ATP, whatever, there's going to be a series of steps. Some of them are just a few steps, some of them are quite a few, depending on what the reaction needs to be. Okay, so in response, that transduced signal, the signal that was received, triggers a very specific response. Okay, so the target cell has a response. It's like, oh, we got to spring into action because this happened. Okay, so here again, here's our membrane, and here's those proteins. this molecule comes in and attaches it. You can see the little site there. Okay, it's like, okay, we got a problem here. Here's, I'm bringing you the message. The message comes into the cell and something's going to happen. There's going to be a series of steps that occur. Okay, this is your transduction. Okay, and this right here is going to cause some sort of response. Maybe it's a release of a hormone. Maybe it's a, absorbing of water, whatever. The response is here. So whenever you're talking about signaling in cells, first you got to get the information. Then it goes into the cell and there's going to be something that happens because of that information. Like I said, if there was a signal, you got a radio signal, and let's say it's when they're fighting in the war, this is the troops getting ready to deploy. They're all getting their stuff, they're getting their gear, and then the response is they're going to go to some place and fight or whatever. Okay, so there's a signal, there's some sort of response because of the signal, and then they do something because of it. So this is getting ready, and this is actually doing it. And that's your 3: reception, transduction, response. Okay, so the intercellular receptive protons, that means intra, that means in between them, are found in the cytoplasm or the nucleus, depending on. So we're talking about that information has to come out of the bloodstream and go into the cell, and then inside the cell, we're going to have something going on. It could happen in the cytoplasm, it could happen in the nucleus. It depends on. Okay, so there's small, remember, hydrophobic means they don't like water. There's very small little chemical messengers that can move across that membrane and activate those receptors. Okay, they have to be small to get across the membrane. And remember, the ends, we have hydrophilic and we have hydrophobic. So the hydrophilic will be attracted to it and it'll let it move through and go on and do whatever it's supposed to do in the cell. Okay, examples, we have hydrophobic messengers that are like steroids and thyroid hormones in animals. Thyroid is really important to our metabolism of our food. Okay, anybody that's ever had a thyroid condition knows how important your thyroid is. Most of us take our thyroid for advantage of it because it just does a whole bunch of things for us, and we don't have to worry about it because we got all these little messengers that do that for us. Okay, an active hormone receptor complex, okay, that's a pretty fancy word, is like a transcription factor. It's going to turn on specific genes. So the difference between this is just a message, but a hormone receptor complex, in other words, we need to make something here. Let's say you got a cut and all of a sudden you need to make more skin cells. This complex is going to go into that DNA. And if you remember, we talked about transcription and translation. I know that was a long time ago, but transcription is opening up part of that DNA and making a copy of it. We're going to turn on a gene. We're going to turn on the gene that says, hey, we need to make more skin cells because we got a cut. We need it to heal. Okay? So here's our protein. What's going to happen is this little guy comes into the nucleus and says, hey, we got a problem. We need to make some of this stuff. So the DNA is here. The DNA is your blueprint of how to make things. So the messenger RNA makes a copy of whatever gene it needs. And it's amazing. They know exactly where to go. Crazy, right? But anyway, it makes a copy of the message, the gene that we need. Okay? And then this is the message. This is the messenger RNA. That would be transcription. Making a copy of this, and now it's time to leave. This never leaves. DNA stays in the nucleus. Okay, so the messenger RNA leaves and it comes out to the cytoplasm and it makes a new protein. This would be translation, I'm sorry. This is transcription, this is translation. This new protein might be for skin cells or whatever. And now it's going to go wherever it needs to do. So if we have a hormone receptor complex, it comes in and says, hey, we got a problem, we need to make this stuff. The DNA says, okay, here's the gene for it. Messenger RNA comes, I'm going to make a copy of that. I'm going to bring it out here, and then we're going to make that protein. Okay? And that's all started here with this complex. Okay? We got, a minute left. Okay, small molecules and ions. Sometimes we have secondary messengers. They involve, it's like you've got a pathway and you need an extra boost. So the second messenger are small non-protein water-soluble molecules. In other words, they dissolve in water and they can spread throughout the cell by diffusion. They don't need any energy. Diffusion, remember, doesn't require energy. It's a natural thing. And what they'll do is they'll help. They're like, ushers to help with the process. They're not directly involved, but they make sure the process keeps going. So they're there to help. Okay. We use them a lot in like inside the mitochondria to make energy, and we're going to run out. So again, we'll quit right there and then we'll pick it up later.